Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru, and welcome to the next episode Yogananda podcast. We are going through the book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, line by line. We have reached chapter 9, and we are going through the third part of it. But let's first welcome Riva, our special guest today. She's back. Hello, Riva. How are you doing?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We don't have Chris and Lauren joining us today, but we are the three of us, and we will go through chapter 9, part 3. And we're talking about Master Mahasaya. For me, it's the first time to talk about this chapter here because I wasn't here in the last 2 episodes. So we got a good rotation going on. Only Priyank is like the steady rock who is in every episode. How are you doing, Priyank, today?
Oh, good, thank you. Good to be called steady.
Yeah. So he in this portion, it's Guruji talking about Master Mahasaya, describing him, and he gives him a lot of compliments. He describes him as humble. He compares him to a man, the greatest man of humility he ever knew, which is something that he has met a lot of saints. So yeah, at this point, when Yogananda gives praise like this in superlative, that's pretty high. Priya?
Yeah, I doubt it that he's referring to up to that point where he was like 16 or whatever. He's writing this autobiography when he's 40 or something like that. So I imagine this is like him reflecting on his life, and he's actually saying that he is the greatest man of humility, which is quite
even higher praise than
quite a lot of praise, isn't it?
Yes. For some reason, I always think when people write biographies, they kind of take notes through their life, but it's not how it works, right? You just reflect back on your life afterwards. He created a boys' school in a building that we have already heard about, 50 Amherst Street. This is the building in Kolkata. It has played a role in this book already. Yeah, Priyank?
Yeah, that's the school that he built. That before that, he was actually his short bio was that he was a teacher, and he was a head teacher for much of his life. But he kept he kept having different jobs because he had like loads of principles that weren't in keeping with like performance-led education of the British back then grades. But he also used to go on pilgrimages, and then that would not go down well with management and things like that. So he was for the much of his life he was a very successful head teacher. And then yeah, we can, Riva, perhaps you can read what led him to this point.
Yeah, so in 1905, he retired from the active life of a professor and devoted his remaining 27 years exclusively to the preaching of the life and message of the great master. He bought the Morton Institution from its original proprietors and shifted it to a commodious 4-storied house at 50 Amherst Street, where it flourished under his management as one of the most efficient educational institutions in Kolkata. He generally occupied a staircase room at the top of it, cooking his own meal, which consisted only of milk and rice without variation, and attended to all his personal needs himself.
And the great master he's obviously talking about is Ramakrishna Paramahansa, who will.
I was just going to ask that.
Yeah, we'll talk about him in a lot more detail in the next episode, because Guruji has specifically described him as a Christ-like sage.
Well, Ramakrishna and Guruji, did they? Is there an overlap in their lifetimes?
Oh, no. Maybe in their lifetime, but they didn't meet for sure.
They didn't meet.
Oh. No.
But their devotees did. So there you go.
Yeah.
since you mentioned the British and the school system, Priyank, do you have any insights on the differences between Indian and British education systems?
Well, right now it's pretty similar because they established. But heaven only knows. Heaven only knows what it would have been like. Actually, no, not heaven only knows. We kind of know from. We're going to talk a little bit about how Master Mahasaya's methods of teachings were, and also Guruji talks about it in terms of like what the ancient universities were like, and then he talks about the ideal, like how to live schools and education, which we're going to talk about later in the autobiography, which he established in Ranchi. So it's coming, but probably a bit later.
Yeah, how to live schools, and then Guruji talking to Tagore about education. Those are things that a lot of people who follow Yogananda remember. Here he talks about Master Mahasaya style of education, and he says no words of chastisement passed his lips. And when I heard that, I thought of Waldorf schools that are pretty popular in, I think, in Europe and in America. And I always have to name drop when there's an Austrian somewhere involved. So Rudolf Steiner is like.
What are these schools? Describe what the principles are.
So anti-authoritarian education. So it is more like you try to foster the talent inside the kid that naturally spring in the kid, rather than trying to impose on the kid a strict regime, a one-fits-all approach.
So if I let off a stink bomb, do you remember those like glass capsule stink bombs that you used to get?
That would not go well there or in any school. So.
You know, but there's no, and they were like, it's anti-authoritarian, and also the Master Mahasaya says here, no words of chastisement ever passed his lips. So what would happen in such scenarios for mischievous boys?
See, unfortunately, I never had the pleasure to be in a Waldorf school. I know a few Waldorf school teachers here in the US.
Yeah.
And it's more difficult to be a Waldorf school teacher than when you have all those tools of disciplining children at your disposal. So you have to be more creative. You have to also be a bit more listen more to the kids, right? Pick them up from where they are. And like if you keep frustrating the kids, then anti-authoritarian education will become very difficult. So I think part of it is also inspiration and maybe to an extent entertainment, rather than just disregarding the needs of the children completely.
Riva, are you authoritarian? Do you have a lot of chastisement
You guys just
for your children?
you literally, when I was running late for this, literally it was because I was like saying to my son, I've got an email from your school about your behavior and about missing homework. And he was like, do we have to talk about it at all? I was like, yes, we do. You've got an hour and a half to finish that homework, then we're going to talk about it. But I do want to say with the Steiner school thing, I did think of that as well, because it says here, no words of chastisement passed his lips, no rule, and Perul maintained his discipline. High in mathematics, indeed, was taught in these modest classrooms on the chemistry of love, absent from the textbook. So that's kind of like that Montessori type of method, which is like the opposite of like working towards exams. It's the opposite of like doing things to like fill in sheets or like get results at the end. It's about love for the love of learning, which is, I feel as a parent, is really lacking in the UK. So it really made me feel happy when I was reading that, because I was like, he's like imbibing kids to want to like enjoy learning, which is a really nice thing, right?
Absolutely. I think our schooling system, it's a conundrum of it. We're like in this ascending age, and I feel like we're going to completely the wrong direction. We're like going towards standardized tests, and this really, I think we're trying to put less and less effort into education, rather than putting the student first and having smaller classrooms, more communication. And I don't know, maybe it will improve at some point, but I feel like right now the schooling system in most countries that I've seen is not amazing. But I don't know. I'm not an expert. Priya?
Do you remember in your schooling or university, do you remember any really good educators?
Mhm.
What do you remember what made them stand out through compared to all the teachers that you've had?
Yeah, that's a good question. But I think that the teachers that I loved were mostly in that subjects that I was interested in. And I was interested in those subjects because they were making it interesting. So I had this amazing geography teacher who could talk geography, world politics, and those kind of things in a way that I couldn't stop listening. It was like a drama that unfolded before me, and I just couldn't stop. And even when the class was over, I would have had more questions and more questions. And um, I think really a good teacher can sell almost any subject. Yeah. What about you guys?
River, do you have an
No, you
example?
go. No, I was going to say, like same for me. The teacher that really stood out for me was my English teacher, who just like really was passionate about English and brought it to life, and was really curious about the way that we learn English, and that was my favorite subject, and that's like a big part of like the work I do as well. So it definitely impacted me. But I have a question after this for you both. But Priyank, first I want to hear about your experience.
I was going to elaborate more on Ramakrishna Paramahansa, the Gospel of Ramakrishna Paramahansa book, which is what the quote you read out from as well. They talk about Master Mahasaya's style of teaching as well. It says that ordinary teachers confine their instruction to what is given in books without much thought as to whether the student can accept it or not. But M, who is Master Mahasaya, would first of all gauge how much the student could take in and by what means. He would employ aids to teachings like maps, pictures, and diagrams so that his students could learn by seeing.
Amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's experiential.
I don't know if you guys ever had that, but when I was in school, there was this really popular mat that had like a map of the world on it, and that was mine. And whenever I was like, I had to do homework and I needed a distraction, I looked at this mat and looked at all the different countries, and that was so interesting. And I feel like that's why now I know pretty much where every country is and most of the capital cities. And visual learning is something I think there's different types of learners, but like when you see the thing in front of you, it's so much easier to remember it, I think.
Totally.
I keep one of those maps that work, Mike. Those maps.
Oh, yeah.
Those geography world map. But that to me proves that the world's flat as well, that one.
Yes. Totally. All right. And he goes on that he's not only doing it in a non-authoritarian way, but he then mentions mathematics, chemistry, and like subjects that are challenging, right? It's not there aren't easy concepts to grasp. And I feel like what we just said in this, if you teach it in this right kind of manner where you use those visual aids and you use those kind of ways to describe it to children, like first see, like I love what you just said, that he actually was trying to see how much can this kid absorb and then teach him accordingly. Then I think all those concepts are much better absorbed by the children, and they also appreciate it. And I think also there is a point where the child is motivated by when it feels like accomplishments have happened, right? When you feel like, oh, I know this now, I learned this, right? And when you give a child those kind of moments, then I feel like you will create real learning machines after a while.
Here he talks about higher mathematics was taught in the schools, in the modest classrooms. I assume that he's not talking about like advanced maths and more like spiritual
Mm.
principles, because the next line is that it's a chemistry of love.
Mhm.
And that love that he's instilling is not just for like, life, but probably education as well. And then
Mhm.
school then doesn't become a burden, it becomes something that you enjoy, and education
Mhm.
becomes something that you want to do rather than that you're coerced into doing, as most children are these days. And they don't have that. Well, few children have that, don't they? And they're usually the ones that are classified as the nerdy ones, which
Mhm.
is for some stupid reason seen so negative, isn't it? Being a nerd. But it's so we were discussing this, and my friends and I were just on holiday, and we're really all of us are a bunch of nerds or geeks. So we were just debating which one of us was the bigger nerd, and what is the difference between a nerd and a geek. So we were discussing all of this. Thankfully, I was the lowest ranked nerd there.
I need to meet these friends of yours, Craig. I'm worried about what the top ones were like.
They've come to the
Yeah.
center before, but
Bigger
but
nerd than you, Priyank. That's hard now.
but it's true, isn't it? Why is it considered negative? It's just so sad, isn't it?
It is
Yeah.
so true.
I think it's better now than it used to be, though. It's like I feel like there's a lot more awareness now that there are people like that who are really enjoy going into those complicated concepts and use them all the time in their daily life more than other people, for sure. There's even TV shows about people like that. So
I don't
we've come a
actually
long
fully
way.
understand this sentence. It says, higher mathematics indeed was taught in these modest classrooms, and the chemistry of love absent from the textbooks. The chemistry of love
Yeah.
absent. What does that mean?
So
I think that's what he brought to the table, right? Because
Yeah.
it wasn't there.
Oh,
The
it was
text-
that wasn't in the textbooks. Oh, God,
Yeah.
okay.
So textbooks are
Yeah.
usually just just information, the
Oh,
splurge
got
of
it.
information, right? There's no in textbook there isn't that feeling where you're instilling a desire to learn those subjects from
Mm.
students, i.e. hence he's talking about the chemistry of love, which is even in like philosophy textbooks. It's not there, is it? But if you can find it, is it what's that book? It's Sophie's Choice, where she literally is just a dream, and she goes through all the philosophies and all the history of philosophers in Greek and up to modern times. I've forgotten what the book's called, but it's a famous one. And also I remember reading recently Glimpses of World History by Jawaharlal Nehru, and
Mm.
and what that is essentially is it's a series of letters to him whilst he was in prison to Indira. So he was teaching her daughter via letters, and then she collated these letters and made a textbook out of it. And it's got like really beautiful like current affairs and things that happened to him in the day. So it adds this beautiful arc of relevance to her and to the learning process. Whereas if you read something like that, it's just so much more engaging than just mind-numbing facts of history, isn't it? History is one of those subjects that you can literally die of boredom.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Absolutely.
I'm not making a plug for documentaries now, but seeing as I do work in them, that is really what you want to do, which is tell people about important things and shine the light on them, but do it like through a narrative and through a story that makes people want to come and want to learn, and not actually turn up for the current affairs bit, but stay and then walk away with it.
Sophie's World is the book, sorry.
Sophie's Choice is a different film, a very dark film.
Yeah. Sophie's World. I haven't seen Sophie's Choice, so I can't comment.
Okay, that's
it's
like a mega sad film.
I was thinking it's definitely not Sophie's Choice. Yeah.
Sophie's World. Yeah.
So it's hard to describe how well Yogananda's writing is in this chapter, but it's like that in every chapter. So we keep saying that, but I almost have to go sentence by sentence here because this is such
line
poetry.
by line, you might say.
Line by line, yeah. And because he now says he teaches, he uses the word spiritual contagion, and he says rather than by impermeable precept. And this is so beautiful, right? So it basically means that first of all, he kind of, this love for God that he has in him is like contagious to his students and motivates them. And then this word impermeable is amazing because what he really is, it's not just a one-way street, right? It's a back and forth between the children and him. And it's a good teacher is not just someone who teaches, but he also learns from his students, right? And the students, they can also get the feeling that they gave something to the teacher. It's a give and take, right? It's an exchange, right? Because you're both souls, you're both human beings, and this is what's going on there. And I feel like if you let this kind of process happen, then the students will trust the teacher, and there will be a real sense of respect mutually. And I feel like this is what modern education should be. And he wrote about this in the 40s, and this happened in the 1910s or 20s. So really great.
Beautifully expanded upon, Mike.
Yeah,
really nice. Riva, if I asked Vishnu, would he describe that you teach with wisdom by spiritual contagion?
Vishnu, come here for a second. Do you think that I teach like my wisdom I teach to you through spiritual contagion, or do you think through impermeable precept? How would you describe the way I teach? Is it in a spiritual way, or was it dogmatic? It's not spiritual. That's the answer. Okay, I'll take that.
He's gonna get it later, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. He knows. He knows he is.
Remember, no chastisement should ever cross your lips.
You have to remember that, Priyank, when you're telling me about the tech stuff I'm doing wrong.
Oh gosh, is it chastisement or is it gentle probing?
It's gentle. It's gentle, gonna say. You're very patient. You know what? The next line in this is my favorite line.
Go on.
Can I read it? Yeah. So, consumed by an unsophisticated passion for the Divine Mother, the saint no more demanded the outward forms of respect than a child. I really like that consumed by an unsophisticated passion sentence, part of the sentence, because I actually, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, you know, in the Awake documentary, you know, there's a musician, and I don't know who the musician is, but it feels like it's some kind of famous American person. He's got big glasses and a beard.
Krishna Das.
Oh, the Krishna Das.
No, it's not. It's somebody with an English name. I think, I don't know. Okay. But maybe it is him, actually. Maybe it is him. But he says, when like Guruji was singing, he was like, it wasn't a beautiful voice, but it's not about being a beautiful voice. It's about he's singing to God from his heart. Like it's a bellowing, deep call. And I liked, and that's actually what's more powerful, right? It's not superficial. So I like the kind of, I think there's something about something being an unsophisticated passion that makes it really uninhibited. It makes it not performative. It makes it not for anyone but oneself. And it made me think of like those kind of like Sufi singers who like really are like just in that divine, like Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan and people like that who get just so engrossed in that devotion. And also there's, you know, Hindu ones as well. You know, they like Punjabis, we have like these kind of like jagratas, which are like all night. I'm sure like other people do as well, but like all night when you're singing about Mata and like the Divine Mother. And these people, when they're singing, they're so like lost and engrossed in that devotion that it's so otherworldly. And I kind of that's what that sentence makes me think. Like he was always in that trance of his own world. Like he wasn't doing anything for anyone else.
He this unsophisticated passion and he demanded no outward forms of respect.
Yeah.
Like Guruji, he's really elaborating on essentially the first line of this section that we're reading, where Guruji's saying that he's the greatest man of humility ever met. And later on in this section, he talks about when he tried to garland him, and you get the same sort of reaction. What a stunning reaction! We'll talk about it a bit later. But yeah, you're right. I think we had River. We had the what's it called? The Kirtan, Janmashtami Kirtan recently. We were talking about this very concept of, has he got a nice voice or has she got a nice voice? And then some of the old timers were like, it's not about having a nice voice. It's about singing from here. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's so true. But yeah, I was going to say, but my nephews would, very young. I'm sure they would want to hear a nice voice too.
I certainly don't have a nice voice. I just want to add that into the mix.
Well, you don't need it by your own hypotheses. You don't need a nice voice, do you?
That is true.
So next year, then you're going to be chanting.
But I also feel like with the humility part, that comes through again and again and again in the autobiography. So many examples. There's like, when Babaji's washing those people's feet at the Kumbh Mela, and then Guruji's like, or Swami Vivekananda's like, why are you doing that? And he's like, it doesn't matter, like who they are, whether they're good or bad. And also even the bit when, like Swami Vivekananda is saying, when Guruji says, look, I used to watch him, and somebody would come. I'm really paraphrasing this, but would come and say, criticize him about something, and he'd just like sit there and listen to it, and he'd be like, well, if they want to say that, they can say that, like it doesn't bother me. And those things, they really come in my mind so often, because so many times, like through in my own life, there are times when I'm like, that was wrong, how could someone say that, how can the ego bumps up, and then I'm like, well, if the great ones can take all that, who am I? Like such an example of humility.
Well said.
Yeah. And I feel like this humility is something that sets him, I'm not sure, does it set him apart from the other saints he met so far in the autobiography? Because Guruji is really drawn to Master Mahasaya in many ways, right? Like I feel like with other saints that he met, he came across a red flag pretty quickly. But here he didn't. Here he just loves this man. He admires this man a lot. And there's no Priyank, before we go into that.
That's exactly what I was going to say. What you said, that he has met some absolute greats, and if you compare him to what's it called, Sri Yukteswar, who we're obviously going to talk about in the next chapter, or Dayananda, these people have got these massive organizations and lots and lots of disciples, and judging by this chapter and what's to come with the bioscopes and how he can intercede and give Guruji divine experiences of Divine Mother, he's literally no less than some of these stalwarts that are in the autobiography. But you don't get that feeling at all when you're reading his words and his actions and his humble life. He literally, he spent most of his life just writing about his guru, and that book came like world famous. The only account of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa that there is and it's one of the few that does it so detailed. Like before, there are other biographies about saints, but they're not like his one. Is literally every single day, every minute that he was with him, he chronicled what he said.
What is it called? What's the book called?
The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa.
Have you read it?
I'll send it to you. I'm reading it for this chapter, so I'm about a quarter of the way through it. But it's quite a beast.
I would love to read it. Is it like for people like me who do need things to be a bit like Like that's why like autobiography is quite easy to read. Is it easy to read or is it a bit more intellectual?
Autobiography is easy to read. Are you?
Yeah.
Have you?
As in I read it to my kids when I like recently, and I thought when I was reading it to them, I'd have to keep like re-explaining things, but I was like, actually, I don't need to. Like, it's really like understandable, apart from the super like philosophical bits.
Apart from that, and the footnote.
Depends on the chapter, I guess. And
depends if
also
you're doing it line by line.
If you are English as a second language like me, then it was quite challenging when I read it the first time in English. But,
Riva's family is full of deep intellects. I met your husband, so I can
she just does it like this. Yeah.
Definitely not. Wait, is there a picture of Master Mahasaya?
Yeah, it's in there.
Is it?
It's in the pages.
You showed me.
Yeah, in the pages to come.
Yeah.
Okay, so can I have a look at it? What page is it on?
I'll show you here. Look, have a look at this.
Oh, I've got one here. Oh wow!
Yeah.
You have seen him, but no doubt you wouldn't have. You would have just glossed over that page. Just carry on reading.
No, you know what? I love the pictures.
Yeah.
Cool.
So like we said earlier, Guruji really loves Master Mahasaya, and there isn't really a dialogue that leads into this discussion. But the next line kind of says, "I'm not your guru. He shall come a bit later, a little later," and that is telling because that kind of shows how revered he is by Yogananda. I feel like if he would have said, "I am your guru," then this would have been it, right? Priyank?
Do you think he's like just in constant search for the guru, just like whoever you meet that sort of divine stature, he's like looking to him with like piercing his soul to see if he's got that connection. And so like this Master Mahasaya could obviously feel it. He's had to just say it in some moment of pure devotion that they were sharing.
Possibly. Maybe he didn't mention a dialogue because there was none. There was more like a kind of telepathic communication going on, and then he felt the need to say it out loud.
Or an interiority moment, one of many that is in the autobiography, but that's not actually mentioned explicitly here. Maybe we've stumbled upon a hidden one.
And no, true. And I feel like another reason why Guruji might have mentioned it here is because those first few chapters are Yogananda's search for a guru, right? So he goes from saint to saint, not just to have saint friends, but to find a guru. That's his ultimate goal. And so he meets this amazing person who he really admires. However, he's not going to be his guru, but he leaves him with a bit of foresight. He tells him, first of all, that he will find his guru and that he will come a little later, and that he says your experiences of the divine in terms of love and devotion will be translated into his terms of fathomless wisdom. So great prediction, and probably very comforting for Mukunda to hear at this point that he's close and that it will be a really life-changing experience once he found his guru. Yes, Priyank?
It's just such a great prophecy, which obviously we then know later to be 100% accurate. It's just so detailed, isn't it? Like it says through his guidance, he says your experience of the divine in terms of love and devotion will be translated into fathomless, wisdom, by paraphrasing a little bit there. But this literally, you couldn't describe Guruji's autobiography and his life and his realization really better than that, could you? But the force, the vision that Master Mahasaya must have to be able to give such a specific prophecy. It reminds me of when Guruji had his experience in cosmic consciousness or Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Remember some of the lines were in Guruji, he said, past present and future, no more for me. And he also said, like, thoughts of all men, past, present, and to come, were all also, there in his experience. So Master Mahasaya has clearly gone through this state because he's reading Guruji's life as if he's reading his autobiography in a second, the book that he was going to publish 30 years later.
Yeah. And notably, after this sentence is said, the tone changes. Suddenly, he already praised him before with compliments, but now he just starts revering him as the saint afterwards, and he becomes very appreciative of just being in the presence of this great man. From this point on, he calls it his divine cup is full, and he even says it overflows. And I guess when he says overflows, he says it overflows on my being. So this is a beautiful metaphor of how you benefit from being in the presence of a saint. And it seems like Master Mahasaya is very generous with his time with Mukunda. Mukunda says he's like going there every day, spending time with him. And even though he knows he's not going to be his guru, he feels like he's greatly benefiting from just being in the presence of such a great master. That is probably also a person who is recognized by Mukunda as a saint, but probably not by everyone. The way I imagine it, especially, in this world, if you are very humble, that doesn't get you to fame, right? But then if you are a real devotee of the Divine Mother, then you, like Mukunda, then you see the inner values.
Yeah. You mentioned fame there. And Master Mahasaya is obviously not very famous, even amongst the disciples of Vivekananda. Very few would then go on to read, Ramakrishna Paramahansa's biography, of which is obviously written by Master Mahasaya. And very few would then actually go and think, oh, who was this biographer? Who was this stenographer of the great man's life? But look at the incarnation that was, Master Mahasaya. And one wonders that, he's not very famous, obviously, but books like Autobiography of a Yogi make him famous, and that's why it's so nice that Guruji's included saints like Master Mahasaya in his book and dedicated a whole chapter to them. But one wonders how many such saints are within our sphere of influence and our geographical sphere that are completely unheard of, and themselves not wishing to be heard.
That's true, right?
Silently.
I think so. Sorry to interrupt, but I think that there's so much to be said about them not wanting to be that's not they're just kind of like doing their thing. They don't want the I don't know. I can't speak for Guruji, obviously, but I do think there is, like, his joy was in meditating and being with God, but this was his duty to go out and share the message. But I think there's so much, the inner stuff was so important as well. So it's I don't know. I think it's one of those things where I think they go out to the world for our benefit, not for their own.
And there's also they've got very specific things that they're born to do, I suppose, as Master Mahasaya was. He's, he said his life's purpose was to chronicle Ramakrishna Paramahansa's pastimes, essentially, and what a way he's done that in that book. But I remember my cousin in India, he was in a reflective mood about how his God and gurus have taken hold of his life, and he was saying, oh, my son was in his finals at school, and he needed various grades to get into university, and he just, like, for the last couple of weeks he had this really, really sharp pain, and the doctors didn't know how it was, and it was really impacting his school, and this was the finals, and his family belonged to this line of gurus, and the one that one of the saints from that lineage, he literally just went to see him to take darshan, and so he can seek his blessings. And as soon as my nephew touched his feet, it just vanished. The 2 weeks and the colossal pain, and then somehow my cousin also figured out what had happened, so he was also at his feet. So these are like completely unheard of saints, and how many must there be that we don't know? And we, this was obviously a very tangible healing, but how many of them must be more subtle, and that we don't, we sometimes attribute it to God and luck and fortune, but fate plays a hand.
For sure.
Yeah, I think humility often plays a role. Like, I think it's exactly right what you just said, Priyan. Like, oftentimes those kind of healings, they happen in a more subtle way, also because the healer doesn't want all the fame. They just want to respond to a prayer rather than being someone who becomes like the big prophet who can heal everybody and then attract all this fame that is unwanted.
And how can we tune into these rates, Mike? How would we tune into one that was living down the road from us, for example?
We don't know. Mike might be one of them.
Exactly. That's true.
How do we tune into you?
How would we tune in?
I'm sorry to disappoint. Yeah.
How would we tune in using Guruji's techniques? As you mentioned, like increasing your intuition, doesn't he?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not easy. I think as a devotee, if you meet a saintly if I can only imagine if there was like Guruji living down the street, because that's kind of my guru. So and then tuning into him, I don't know. Like there's so many stories of the monks that were his contemporaries and how they interacted with him, and it's so different because they lived with him, kind of, right? So they had this real relationship with him, and he was basically telling them how he was basically like their football coach. He was like, you do your meditation in the morning, in the evening, and you work for God, and then whenever they had problems and came to him, he would tell them to give it to Divine Mother and meditate more. And I guess the connection can really be made out here in this world, right? The connection can be made by developing your intuition and meditation, I guess. Even if Guruji was here, I guess it would be different, but it also wouldn't be so different. So this humility continues of Master Mahasaya, because now Guruji, he wants to put a garland around him. And when I read this, I imagined this would be like when you arrive in Hawaii at the airport and they put a garland over you. But this has some spiritual significance. Priyan, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, but just before we do, there's another sentence that I saw in here that was really nice. That it said that never before had I bowed in utter reverence, which would mean that this is the most saintly soul he's had the privilege of being in the physical presence of. And we know before, for example, he had visions of Divine Mother, and he could see the light, and even Mahasaya came to him in like a vision or something along those lines when he was very young. But this is a physical and tangible expression and experience for him. So he's bowing with utter reverence, and he says that he felt an immeasurable privilege to tread on the same ground as him, and that as that he had sanctified. And I was wondering who his contemporaries were that sanctified the same ground. And I was thinking Vivekananda is a brother disciple of Master Mahasaya, so he would have been there. Guruji talks about Ramana Maharishi in the autobiography later, and that was a similar time. And then we obviously know Sri Yukteswar was lurking around those streets and those cities. And there's others in India that were around that time, like Shirdi Sai Baba is very popular. This mystic who's very famous in India amongst Muslims and Hindus. So like all these greats were around at this time. So that soil was very, very sanctified indeed in those years. And that's not even mentioning all the other saints that are mentioned in this book, like Swami Vivekananda, etc. So it's a very blessed ground that Guruji is hallowed, and he himself is obviously contributing to that, even as a youth.
I think there's something so amazing about that. Like, it just makes me want to go there and just like, you know, be there and touch that soil. Like, it's just an amazing thought to think about, even if not even at one time, but across the generations, how many amazing souls were there.
I went to Mathura, which was Krishna's birth place, like 10, 15 years ago, with that same cousin actually that I was describing earlier. And I went in, you know, just essentially as a, you know, bit of a spiritual tourist, but essentially a tourist. And I, you know, went there and offered my prayers to all the Krishna temples, etc. And later on, I was reading some scripture, and it talked about how Krishna's cousin, how he went to see Krishna's in Mathura and Vrindavan. So he said before stepping into the grounds of that place, he would realize that Krishna has, you know, sanctified the soil that's here. So before going before touching his own feet, touching the ground, he'd completely, fully prostrate, even before entering the precinct that Krishna has gone in. That's even before meeting Krishna. And I was like, you know, here I just waltzed in without care in the world. But this is the difference between a devotee, and Uddhava was one of the ideal devotees of Krishna, and you can read about him in the scriptures as well, the Bhagavatam.
You know, when I just went recently, when I was in LA, I went to Mount Washington. Every step I was taking inside, like upstairs to like Guruji's room, I was so like, there was no way that you could not feel that was a really like an incredible honor to be taking those steps on that. Like, I just never, it was like a 5-minute thing in total, but there's just no space to take that for granted. Like, you can just feel it even if you want to like mess around. Because I took the kids with me as well, and I was a bit worried going in that they were going to touch stuff and like knock things over or something. But they actually were like so mesmerized. I didn't even have to tell them off once.
Amazing. We went to pilgrimage to Mount Kailash, and
my gosh,
and Manasaro, Lake Manasaro, which is nearby. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. One of the things they told us was this is obviously the abode of Shiva, and this is not just Shiva. This is the body of Shiva. And as an Indian, if we would never walk on any human, right? But if you had to walk on someone, how carefully would you walk on them? With how much, like, you know, consideration. And this is how you should take every single step once you're on the abode of Krishna. So Riva, you must be very much in tune compared to where I was when I went to Mathura.
That must have been amazing, that trip. That's like a kind of definite thing I want to do in my life. I feel like that's such a special place.
Indeed. Another time, another podcast.
I think not only as an Indian, you wouldn't walk on other people. Most people wouldn't.
Yeah.
But there's something so, like, if you think about that sentence, there's something so beautiful about that, because like the whole world is one, right? And is one body. So we should always feel like that wherever we're walking, shouldn't we?
Yeah. Wouldn't get anywhere, would you?
No, but with care, like treat everything with care.
Tiptoe. Yeah, it's
Like
true.
I was thinking a lot about what you said last time I was on, when you talked about like how every piece of nature has got a kind of role to play, and you were talking about like apples and stuff, and you were saying how like that fleshy bit is supposed to be eaten and it's supposed to be go far away. Like each piece is so intricately designed to kind of go together. It's, if you just think about that, it's all so beautiful, isn't it?
And talking more about that, so Mahasaya, he
That was a nice thing, turn.
prepared, a champak garland. So a champak is this essentially a flowering tree, a magnolia flowering tree, very fragrant. And apparently in Buddhism, it's used to achieve enlightenment. And it was used by the 14th Buddha, and in Tibetan beliefs as well. They're saying that the next era will find enlightenment. The next Buddha will be there, and he'll find enlightenment under this canopy of the tree. So that's the champak garland, and it's obviously quite fragrant and not famous, but common in India to those who grow it for specific purposes, such as what Mike's going to tell us about now that happened.
You mean in the book?
The garland story.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I said earlier, he's trying to put that garland. He just wants to put it around his neck, as I understand, right? And Master Mahasaya refuses it, and I was wondering why that was, because I mean, to me, I didn't. So first of all, I didn't know that this is such a big gesture, right? This is such a tradition. I was wondering if this is a continuation of earlier, where he said, "I'm not your guru," and maybe Guruji was insisting, "No, you are. There's a garland." but but I think now, after hearing all of this, it's more about his humility, that he feels like he doesn't want to be put on a pedestal. He sees himself as a child of God, and he sees Mukunda as a child of God, and he doesn't see really a difference between them in status, and that's why he refuses it. Of course, Mukunda being Mukunda, he's very eager to make this happen, and he feels hurt when he refuses it. And so this is probably, at this point, Master Mahasaya thinks, I don't want to reject this person, and so I will let this happen. And he says, he justifies it in a way that it's acceptable to him. He says, since we're both devotees of the Mother, you may put the garland on this bodily temple as offering to her who dwells within, which is amazing, but also telling. It says, you're not praising me, you're praising the Divine Mother, who is the creator of this body and dwells within. Yeah, Priyank.
Yeah, it's just such a high concept. Takes humility to such a profound level, doesn't it? This, because putting garlands on people in India, you generally do it to your guru or to the deity that you have of God in your home, which most Indians do, and you put it on your parents. A river might do it to a husband. So
those days are long gone, guys.
But it is done even now.
Do you remember, Priyank? You made me do that. It was in the play. Do you remember?
I did. I do remember. And
Wait, actually, I can't remember. No, I didn't have to do a garland. I had to bow down to him.
His feet,
yeah.
It is done, and it's a very traditional paradigm that I dislike as well. But my wife is very keen on traditionality, but so I've stopped her from doing that kind of stuff. But she wants to carry on these things because it's got some spiritual connotations to it. For example, in the Hindu weddings, usually you consider parents and elders as higher than you would never allow them to touch your feet or garland you. but in the process, in the marriage process, when the priest has done all his rituals, and the parents are actually the girl's parents are very much involved in the process. And at the end of the whole process, you are essentially the bridegroom become this elevated spiritual magnet, and they represent the divine couple. And hence, even at that's one of the few stages where a parent would offer higher respect to their child rather than the other way around, because they're essentially they become divine in this very small mandap, as we call it, in this very small altar. And then after that day, then it all goes back to normal in terms of the way the order of respect. But it does happen. But usually, as we say, it's usually to guru. But it's one of the other reasons he may not have wanted to do it is because he was not a Swami. He was not a renunciant. In fact, he was married in his earlier years, and he actually asked his guru Maharaj, who was Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, if he can, after he went through his experiences with him, he asked, can I become, or should I become a saint, monastic order? And Riva, if you can read out that little snippet I just sent you, you can hear what the master, who's Ramakrishna Paramahansa, responded.
Sure. The master who divined, is that the word there? Divined. Is it divined?
Divined.
Okay, so the master who divined the mood of desperation in M. So M is Master Mahasaya.
Yes.
Is resolved to take leave of this playfield of deception, but new faith and hope into him by his gracious words of assurance. God forbid. Why should you take leave of this world? Do you not feel blessed by discovering your guru? By his grace, what is beyond all imagination or dreams can easily be achieved. So basically he said no.
Yeah, he asked him to carry on the path. He's got work to do as a teacher, as a as a stenographer of the life of Ramakrishna Paramahansa, and all the other things that he wanted him to do, because he was obviously a brother disciple to Vivekananda as well at that time. So he had lots of things to do, and the monastic order is a separate path in many ways. So he did not want him to do that, and that was his justification.
I mean, that's
I love how...
even.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say, it reminded me of like Lahiri Mahasaya after he met Babaji, right? When he was like, "You gotta stay. Like, you still got like stuff to do in this phase of your life. Like, you can't." And so it just reminds me of like what Guruji always said which is, I'm actually living this right now as I'm in this experience of telling my child off and doing this podcast at the same time, that that both duties are important, right? Worldly ones and spiritual.
I love how saints always have this natural inclination to become renunciants, but also they abide by what their gurus or Divine Mother tells them. Like if they get told that in this incarnation you are a family man or woman, then it's like that, and they never go like, oh no, I don't want this, or there's never any kind of ego in there that has any wishes, but they just play the role as they're told. Which I don't know, that might, if you're not a fully realized master, this might be a whole different discussion, I would think. Yeah, great. I feel like we've come to the end of the chapter. Is there anything we want to add?
Yeah, that last sentence is quite a good one as well in this section.
Would you mind reading it?
Yeah, his vast nature lacked space in which any egotistical consideration could gain foothold. So he was not falling from his grace.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way he says it, though. He describes him as his nature as vast, but then there is no space for any egotistical considerations. Yeah. So
Yeah, that is it's very cool sentence.
Yeah. He keeps. I don't know. I feel like this is the first time I feel like in the autobiography of a yogi where Guruji just finds someone that he completely vibes with, and it's really beautiful to see. I really I think this chapter is we will also see in the next part of it there's quite some comedy in here as well, right, in this chapter. So he he's a very humble person, Master Mahasaya, but he's also funny and witty. So there's a lot of things still to see in this chapter. All right. Is there anything we want to add still, Priya?
Yeah, just the next section mentions Ramakrishna Paramahansa. So we'll go through some of his not teachings, but his life and how it's relevant to Master Mahasaya, and also relevant actually to us on Self-Realization Fellowship, because as we say, there was a fertile soil, and there was a bit of cross-pollination, shall we say, and we'll go through that in a bit of detail next time.
Amazing. Have you guys read Practical Vedanta, the Vivekananda? No, that's really worth reading. It's like it's a very small book. It's like 110 pages, but it's some of like Guruji's. It's very much in that same spirit of like being fearless and courageous. It's like it's got like a spiritual like courage to it.
Actually there's an organization called the Brahmo Samaj, which basically both Vivekananda and Master Mahasaya, where they met, and then Master Mahasaya went to see his guru, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, and then Vivekananda also went there, and they kind of changed their course. But all of it's actually very much influenced, that organization very much influenced all the spiritual paths in Bengal at the time. So there's a lot of similarities, shall we say, between Ramakrishna Paramahansa's and Self-Realization Fellowship teachings. I think I have read that actually. I've got some of his other little mini books on my shelf, which I'm gonna.
Yeah, it is one of his mini
through.
ones. Yeah, it's a good one.
Awesome.
It's beautiful that those other paths also exist, right? The Vedanta Society has a beautiful temple here in Hollywood that I've been to recently when my dad was visiting. A beautiful bookstore, really nice devotees we met there. And then Ramakrishna also left a pretty great society. So
yeah, we're going to talk about that next time.
Yeah,
there's some amazing spaces. Like, have you been to the Ramakrishna mission in the UK near Windsor?
Yeah, really nice.
Yeah,
all of their centers across, they got so many around the world, and they're really beautiful. My wife was really moved when we went to the one in Baroda in Gujarat, and I've been to many as well. They're scattered across India and the world, actually, aren't they, River?
You know, I've actually only been to the UK one. Maybe I've been to one in Spain, and I've been to one in Bangalore actually. But they always have from them. They do, like, I feel they do have the beautiful gardens as well. That kind of peace garden vibe.
Yeah.
I kind of really, my dad followed that path, so I do. That was kind of my first introduction into this spirituality.
Nice.
Beautiful. All right. So I think we've done justice to this part. Thank you, Reva, for coming on the podcast. And thank you for all our listeners and viewers. Jai Guru.
Jai Guru. Thanks.